If you're a fan of Japanese role-playing video games, the name Hironobu Sakaguchi will be familiar. The name Nobuo Uematsu will also have a ring to it, as both men are inexorably tied to Square Enix's long-running Final Fantasy series, the former its creator and the latter the main composer for most of the series. So when last year I learned that these two legends were working together on a new game, I was excited. After all, I played the life out of The Last Story, a Wii exclusive that is also the product of the meeting of these two minds. It was unique in its presentation, intriguing in its mechanics, and very different in style and tone from the pair's more famous works. So Fantasian Neo Dimension has been on my radar for a while, and I picked it up on release and immediately went to explore this intriguing new game, where the backgrounds and scenery are all handcrafted dioramas, which always reminds me of classic stop-motion animated features. As always, the rules of engagement for hook potential stand as follows. I play through the first hour, the opening 60 minutes of the game, in the same way I'd watch one episode of a long-form TV series. And in that period, I base my score on two primary things. 1. Can the game convey, if not the central conflict, then at least a compelling one? Is there a villain? Is there a situation that makes you want to continue playing and find out more? 2. Does it introduce the core mechanics? Does it show you what the gameplay loop is going to be like for the rest of the gajillion hours that you'll be playing? Fantasian Neo Dimension opens with our main character infiltrating some form of factory. It looks very much like a mechanized city. He's here for some unknown purpose, and from what we gather very early on, he's managed to turn two of the machines to his service. Unfortunately, any interesting lore or even plot points relating to the character's presence here are missing, as our protagonist is amnesiac boy Leo, following the traditional trope of I know my name but I don't know anything else. And I have to say it, I'm not a fan. Amnesiac character storylines are hard to pull off, not to mention that I feel it's a missed opportunity in terms of establishing tone and stakes early on if the character knows what they're doing and why. And I understand why it's done. The amnesia is there primarily so information is doled out slowly, as the narrative demands it. It's just not my favorite approach to storytelling in fiction. Nevertheless, we're swiftly introduced to the combat, and for the first chunk of this hour, the machine factory level, it's very much your standard fare turn-based combat, without really anything standing out. What does stand out, and it's a negative for me, it's the fact the game uses random encounters. I honestly thought we left this mechanic behind to rot in the 90s or early 2000s. On the upside though, random encounters means grinding is very easy. At the end of this prologue and the boss fight, the character very conveniently remembers the face of a girl, and with that his very unusual teleporter kicks in, as it can only warp you to a place if you remember someone who is there, or something like that. Don't know how exactly that works, but okay, not gonna complain too much about it. It is science fantasy after all. Then comes the big exposition section. Just very beautiful background art and walls of text with a voiceover explaining some mechanical malady that's affecting the world, and which represents a nebulous threat. Obviously related in some capacity to the factory we started in, but not really an imminent peril for our character, nor a goal given the fact that Leo doesn't know or remember anything. So we appear in a village, and after wandering around we meet a friendly face who fills in some blanks, and we learn the character is a treasure hunter of some capacity, and he was treasure hunting in the mech city. We also learn that at some point in the past, Leo's adventures got him pretty banged up, and a mysterious girl saved him, and she lives nearby at a fortune teller shop. This is the same girl he remembered, so he could teleport here. So we book it over there and meet who I'm guessing is the female lead of the game, and who's trying to help the character remember the past by requesting a fortune being told for him by the local psychic, who very much won't do it unless we pay him. And so for the rest of the hour, it's a game of trying to gather money while fighting monsters and exploring the town, with Kina, the girl, following along, her presence unlocking the next part of the combat loop, the fact that some abilities can be curved and bypass defenses or formations or target specific groups of enemies. But before all that, we learn of Kina and the psychic Owen, and we do so with text-based cutscenes, very much like that exposition dump after the factory. There are scenes with background art, paragraphs of text, and voice acting. which reminds me of Nier and its many text-based stories. And that's not the only thing that reminds me of Nier, as the main character looks very much like he's from that other series. To be honest, the cutscenes made me wish they had been properly animated, especially the one that deals with how Leo and Kina met. I wanted to play that, see how that scenario played out. The first hour ends just short of the second memory cutscene, at which point we've barely scratched the surface on the core combat. In fact, the curving aspect I mentioned before comes into play after the first hour, but given that it's within 5 minutes of hitting that mark, I'll be generous and not count it against the game, score-wise. But it does leave us with a fairly bog-standard turn-based combat and random encounters for the most part, which, at least to me, are not really that interesting. And mind you, Fantasian has a mechanic where you can bank random encounters and then take them on all at the same time, and I would have loved for the intro sequence to make use of that. That's a huge selling point. That's a great mechanic they could have leaned on and really hook you in. And as for the central conflict, beyond the characters seeking to restore their memories, there's really nothing much to go by. The bacteria infestation is far too nebulous at this point, as we only experience it as a creeping corruption and not a true threat on people's lives. Random enemy encounters seem to be much more of a pressing issue at this point. So with all that said, we get down to brass tacks. Does Fantasian succeed at giving you a conflict to give you an idea of the sort of story you'll be playing through? Not really, but despite my aversion to the Amnesiac storyline, I will concede that it is something of a central mystery, but barely, as it conveys nothing of the world and the stakes are fairly low. 2. Does Fantasian succeed at a good showing of its core gameplay mechanics? Not really. By the time the hour and 5 minutes have gone by, we've seen only the barest of what the system is all about. If we consider the above questions each worth a point, then Fantasian gets half marks for each, leaving one more aspect to consider, and it's the general presentation, the audio-visual part. The game is very beautiful. The diorama evokes some kind of core childhood memory out of me, and the music, what little we hear of in this first hour, is very pleasing. And despite the combat not having anything special to write about in the first hour, it's not boring. It's classic turn-based combat. That's not a bad thing. I don't like the random encounters, but they're not as egregiously frequent as they could be. You're not plunged into a fight every 5 steps on the map. So on that, I give Fantasian a full point. So the final score for Fantasian is 2 out of 3, meaning it gets a silver hook. It may grab some interest, but it's not the strongest opening, especially for a JRPG, and even more so for a game with such luminaries at the helm. But what did you think? Am I being too harsh, or not harsh enough? Let me know in the comments, and make sure to check the companion video for the first hour of my gameplay. See you on the next one.